Because these vaccinations were approved under emergency use authorization, we're being extra careful. We're looking very, very carefully for any type of safety signal that may emerge. And I think that the J&J vaccine was paused by our CDC and FDA with only 6 patients out of 6.8 million people who've gotten it because of 2 reasons. The first is I think they want to be sure that they're being overly cautious, especially because of the circumstances under which this was approved. So they want to make sure that they're really dotting their I's and crossing their T's and making sure that this is not a bigger signal than what it appears to be. The second is, I think, because of what happened in Europe with the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is a similar mechanism vaccine to Johnson & Johnson. It's the same type of adenovirus vector vaccine, and it caused a causal relationship between the vaccine and these blood clots, some of them potentially fatal and life-threatening. So pretty serious adverse reaction. So because of that causal link, I think the CDC and FDA want to just take a time out, look at the data. And if I had to predict what they would do, I would likely say that because this is so rare, less than 1 in a million chance, and the vaccine is so effective, they're probably going to say certain groups are okay to go back and get that Johnson & Johnson vaccine, just like they did in Europe with the AstraZeneca vaccine. That's what the European FDA equivalent did. But I don't think they're going to say, though, we're done with the vaccine altogether, because it is a pretty good vaccine and the risk of this reaction is actually lower than the background rate of this type of a reaction. So it's, yes, it's linked to the vaccine, but very low in incidence.
And then just from it, with what happened in Europe, how long do you think it takes for them to go back and say, okay, maybe not this group's? Like, how long could we be on this pause for?
Weeks. It wouldn't be days and it wouldn't be months. So I think a few weeks to really look at the data, make sure that they understand those 6 individuals, what their risk factors were, and essentially to try to figure out which groups may be the highest risk for this very rare side effect. It seems like what's emerging and what happened in Europe was that young women under the age of 50 appear to be particularly high risk, and in general, younger individuals. One of the mechanisms by which this response is occurring is immune activation that leads your immune system to form antibodies against your platelets as it's making antibodies against the virus. And those antibodies against the platelets, which are the blood clotting cells, cause the platelets to stick together because they stick to the platelets and they cause clumping of the platelets. So that causes blood clots to form. And unfortunately, you can't really treat them as easily with blood thinners because the platelets get used up. So they're also higher risk of bleeding. So you're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place with having blood clots and having risk of bleeding. Now, all 6 of these women had cavernous sinus thrombosis, which is basically a blood clot that happens in a vein in the brain. And that can be particularly dangerous just because the brain is a closed compartment and a closed space.
Absolutely. Okay, for someone who got the J&J, let's say last week, or maybe yesterday, who is kind of panicked this morning because they're just hearing that they're not giving it anymore, what advice or what would you tell them to ease their concern?
The first thing I would say is that don't panic, because the likelihood is literally less than 1 in a million, which is extremely rare in the world of medicine, and it's still probably offering you good protection. The second thing I would say is if you're within 3 weeks of your J&J shot, keep your radar up, particularly if you're a young woman under the age of 50, and just keep your eyes open for anything that seems unusual. The types of things that may present with usually happen about 1 to 3 weeks after you get the injection, and they may be symptoms such as a severe headache, visual changes, shortness of breath, leg swelling, abdominal discomfort, anything that seems out of the ordinary. I would have a low threshold to call your physician. And rest assured that even if, God forbid, you have this life-threatening complication, there are treatments that can be employed for it if it is detected.
Great. And anything else you think our viewers need to know moving forward here in the next few weeks?
I think this pause should really inspire confidence rather than feeding vaccine hesitancy. And I really want to drive that message home, because this should tell you that even though 6 out of over 6 million people had this really rare complication, less than the background rate, we're still pausing and taking a look. So that should tell you that we're being extremely transparent about what's going on with the vaccines, and the regulatory agencies really taking this seriously. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the vaccine was bad. This is a natural part of what happens when millions of people get a vaccination. Some, because of genetic factors or other factors that we don't understand, may have reactions that most people don't have. So I don't want people to start thinking that the vaccines are bad or to use this as a reason to not get any of the vaccines. Because even if the Johnson & Johnson is on pause, we have two really great options that we've now had, months and months of clinical trial data, real world data on, that are Moderna and Pfizer, that are seemingly very safe.